So here's the thing about the priests of ancient Egypt that I keep coming back to, which is not the exoticism of it, not the sort of Learning Channel wow factor of a man plucking out his own eyelashes with bronze tweezers by torchlight, but the sheer administrative tedium of it. The fact that Egyptian priests in the 6th century BCE would shave their entire bodies every other day as part of a ritual cleansing, plucking out all of their eyebrows and even their eyelashes every other day. Which is to say, this wasn't a one-time rite of passage, some dramatic threshold crossing into holiness. It was maintenance. It was upkeep. It was, in the fullest and most spiritually terrifying sense of the word, a chore. And I think there's something almost unbearably poignant in the idea of a priest, a man whose entire social function is to be an intermediary with the eternal and the divine, spending some non-negligible fraction of his conscious hours on his knees with a pumice stone or a bronze razor, going after the small of his own back, worrying, and I have to imagine he worried, because who among us doesn't worry about the tasks we've been told matter infinitely? And Herodotus himself, who is basically the original unreliable but earnest travel blogger of the ancient world, tells us the whole point was hygienic/metaphysical, that the priests did this so that no lice or any other foul thing may come to be upon them when they minister to the gods. Which means the sacred and the parasitic were, for these guys, essentially the same category of problem, filed under the same anxious mental folder. The lice were real, the gods were real. Both required constant, humbling physical vigilance. And I don't think you get to have one kind of purity, the metaphysical kind, the kind that lets you stand in front of a moon and not feel like a fraud, without submitting to the other unglamorous kind. The kind that's just skin and tweezers and the number 3, as in every 3 days, as in your whole life measured out in intervals of bodily erasure. What gets me, honestly, is the wig. Because wigs were predominantly worn by elite men and women as status markers, and a wig shielded the shaven or cropped head from the harmful effects of direct sunlight, meaning the priest, having spent the morning eliminating every last follicle of himself, then put a fake head of hair back on top, so that the actual self underneath, the raw, hairless, purified self that had done all that work, was never even seen. Nobody got to witness the diligence. That's the part I can't stop thinking about. So here's the connection that snapped into place for me, somewhere around 3 in the morning, which is the hour at which all my genuinely useful thoughts seem to arrive, unbidden and slightly embarrassed of themselves. The thing that links the depilated Egyptian priest to something as apparently unrelated as the modern competitive swimmer, the Olympic-level one, standing on the block at the World Championships, having shaved not just his legs and arms, but essentially his entire dermal surface, is this shared, almost theological belief that friction, actual physical friction, hair against water, hair against air, is the thing that links hair as a kind of low-grade static between the self and the medium it's trying to move through. Friction is impurity, is drag, is the thing standing between you and total unmediated contact with whatever it is you're trying to approach, whether that's Amun-Ra or a personal best in the 200-meter freestyle. Because swimmers shave, not for aesthetics, despite what you might assume watching the broadcast, but because studies going back to the 80s have shown it can reduce drag by a genuinely measurable amount, can make the water feel, and I've heard swimmers actually use this word, different, more like it's not a separate substance you're pushing through, but something closer to an extension of your own skin, which is, if you squint at it, essentially the exact same metaphysical claim the Egyptian priest was making 3,000 years earlier, that hairlessness is a technology of dissolving the boundary between the self and the sacred medium, whether that medium is chlorinated water or the divine presence in the inner sanctum of a temple at Karnak. And what is strange, What nobody talks about is that both of these practices get hidden the second the performance actually happens. The swimmer puts on a full-body tech suit. The priest puts on the wig. All that labor of self-erasure, gone, papered over by a covering that makes the achievement look effortless, natural, as if the body had simply arrived at this frictionless state on its own. Which is maybe the oldest and most American lie there is. The lie that anything worth having didn't cost you your eyelashes. So, if the previous angle was about admiration, was about finding something almost heroic in the priest's discipline, the plucking as devotion, I think the honest complementary angle, the one that actually keeps me up, is the contrast between a hairlessness that means something and a hairlessness that means nothing, which is to say the difference between the Egyptian priest at his ablutions and, like, an ordinary contemporary American person, let's say a 34-year-old man named Gary, standing in his bathroom under a 40-watt vanity bulb at 11 p.m., tweezing a single ingrown hair out of his eyebrow, for reasons he could not articulate under oath. Because the priest's plucking, however tedious, however much it must have chafed both literally and existentially, was in service of something outside himself. It pointed somewhere. It was, structurally, an act of humility. You are erasing yourself so that the God can be more present, so that the lice, standing in for all worldly contamination, cannot get between you and the eternal. There was, in other words, a recipient for the sacrifice. Whereas our contemporary hairlessness, the stuff of manscaping and threading salons and the multi-billion-dollar industry auditing every follicle on the human body from the eyebrow down, has largely no recipient at all, except an internalized, endlessly dissatisfiable audience of one, watching yourself in a mirror that was specifically designed, with its little ring light, to reveal every possible flaw. Which means Gary's plucking is, in a sense, a more lonesome and metaphysically unsupported act than the priest's ever was, because Gary isn't doing it for Amun-Ra. He's doing it for a version of himself that he suspects, correctly, will never actually be satisfied by the sight of one fewer stray hair. The whole enterprise, a kind of prayer with no addressee, a devotional practice that's lost, along the way somewhere, between Karnak and CVS, the very God it used to be,